All right, today we're diving into Kristen Drazan's announcement speech for her run for governor of Oregon. We're going to break down the key themes, the problems she's identifying, and of course, the solutions she's putting on the table. So, let's get right into it.
So right out of the gate, Drazan sets up this big, central metaphor for her entire campaign. She compares her movement to a ship, a vessel, getting ready to head out into what she calls some pretty stormy seas. And believe me, this isn't just a clever line. It's the foundation for everything else she's about to say.
So, what does she really mean by this? Well, she's basically painting a picture of Oregon as that ship, and right now it's caught in a really bad storm. Her campaign, she argues, is all about providing the new leadership and the clear vision needed to navigate through that crisis. It really sets the tone for her whole speech, which is part diagnosis of the problem and part prescription for the cure.
Okay, let's look at how she actually builds that case. Before she can offer up any solutions, she spends a good chunk of time diagnosing what she sees as Oregon's illness. She lays out a whole list of challenges that she believes are taking the state way off course.
She frames this entire diagnosis around one really pointed question. If Oregon is such a great place with so many resources, why are people packing up and leaving? And her answer is pretty blunt. It comes down to state policies that, in her view, are making it just too hard for people to get by.
And here's her list. She points to all these interconnected issues. High taxes, the crazy cost of living, public safety, homelessness. She sees these not as separate problems, but as symptoms of a bigger issue, a state that she says is, quote, out of control. To really drive home her point about the economy, she gets into some specifics. She points out that Oregon's income tax is one of the highest in the country, and then she adds on new payroll and gas taxes. For her, this isn't just some abstract economic debate. It's a real, tangible burden on families who are just trying to make ends meet.
This quote is a really powerful one that kind of sums up her entire critique of how the state is handling social issues. When it comes to things like drug addiction and homelessness, she argues the government has just been trying to manage the problem instead of actually solving it, which she says creates this endless cycle of managed misery. So after laying out all these problems, Drazan completely shifts gears. She starts to tell her own story, connecting her entire political platform back to her upbringing in Klamath Falls. This is where she really explains her why. She talks about growing up in a town that got hit really hard when the timber industry declined. Her own family, she says, faced serious economic hardship. And she presents this as the experience that really shaped her whole outlook on what it means to struggle and to be resilient.
And this is the kind of detail she uses to make her story feel real. I mean, that quote, it's not really about pancakes, is it? It's about that feeling of getting by on whatever you have left, a feeling she thinks a lot of Oregonians can relate to right now. It's her way of saying, look, I get it, I've been there.
And this is where she draws a really sharp contrast. She argues that the state's current leaders have embraced a culture of protest, while she represents what she calls the pioneer spirit, a focus on building things, on hard work and solving problems. She's basically framing this entire election as a choice between two very different visions for Oregon's future.
Okay, so we've heard the diagnosis, we've heard the personal values behind it. So what's the plan? What's her prescription to get Oregon back on track? Her plan is laid out around these four big pillars, and you can see how they directly map back to the problems she talked about earlier. Cutting taxes and regulations, restoring public safety, making housing more affordable, and improving schools. It's a very straightforward, step-by-step game plan.
Drazan even comes up with her own terms to frame this choice. She calls the current government a nanny state, where you're so buried in regulations that it feels like you need a permit to get a permit. What she wants is to get back to being the beaver state, a place where government just gets out of the way and lets people build their own success.
Now, on public safety, she gets very specific and, frankly, very assertive. She's talking about more cops on the street, cleaning out tent cities, shutting down open-air drug markets. A huge piece of this is holding drug dealers accountable, while also, she says, helping people who are struggling with addiction to get sober. This is clearly a major focus for her. And that brings us to how she wraps up her speech. After all the problems and all the solutions, she finishes with her single biggest promise to Oregon voters, and it all boils down to one word: accountability.
This quote right here, this is probably the most important line in her whole speech. She's trying to move the conversation away from the usual campaign promises. Instead, she's offering what she calls a contract with voters, one based on real, measurable results that she says they can hold her directly responsible for.
Her final message is really an appeal to look past all the partisan fighting. She positions herself as a governor for the everyday person. You know, the farmer, the teacher, the small business owner. The argument she's making is that her focus won't be on political headlines, but on the real-world problems that people are facing every single day.
So that's the breakdown. Drazan is essentially framing this whole election as a choice. Stick with the current way of doing politics, or choose a new path focused entirely on accountability and results. And the big question she leaves hanging out there for voters is simple. Is that the change they've been waiting for?